If you were to map out, like, all of your DNA right now, and you cataloged every single genetic ingredient it takes to build you, you'd find a really weird surprise.
Yeah, it's a completely humbling fact, honestly.
Right, because you have roughly the same number of genetic instructions as a microscopic, dirt-dwelling roundworm.
Which is just a bizarre reality to try to wrap your head around.
I mean, why are you out here building cities and, pondering the universe and listening to this deep dive while that worm is just blindly eating dirt in the dark?
Well, that is the big question.
So today, our mission is to basically reverse engineer you. We are pulling from some of the foundational texts in anatomy and physiology to look at the human blueprint, what anatomists call the levels of structural organization.
Yeah, and this is the architectural blueprint of the human body. It scales all the way from invisible atoms up to the breathing, thinking organism that you are.
And if you look at standard biology texts like Torter's Principles of Anatomy and Physiology, they lay this out in a very specific way.
Right. They use a 6-tier model. So you start at the chemical level, you move up to the cellular level, then tissue, organ system, and finally the organismal level.
It's basically the ladder of you.
Exactly.
But what really strikes me in these sources isn't just the list of levels itself. It's the underlying logic of how you climb that ladder. It all revolves around this concept of emergence.
Yeah, emergence is really the magic of the whole system. The core principle here is that each level is built entirely from the parts of the level directly below it.
Okay, so parts making a bigger whole.
Right. But when those parts combine, they gain these magical properties that the lower level simply didn't have on its own. The whole becomes literally greater than the sum of its parts.
Because, a single water molecule isn't wet, right?
Exactly. Wetness is an emergent property. It only exists when you have a massive group of water molecules interacting together in a specific way.
It really reminds me of playing with Legos. Like, a single small plastic Lego brick doesn't really do anything. It just sits there. Or I guess it hurts your foot when you step on it.
Oh yeah, definitely.
But if you stack 1,000 of those bricks in a highly specific, organized way, suddenly you have a functioning machine. Like a model car with wheels that actually turn and a chassis that absorbs shock.
Right. And the ability to roll down a ramp isn't hidden inside that single little brick. It emerges from the connections.
So if we look closely at those connections, can we solve that paradox we brought up at the very beginning?
Yeah.
The roundworm surprise.
We absolutely can. But to understand it, we have to start at the absolute bottom of the blueprint, the chemical level.
Where atoms combine into molecules,
Yeah.
right? Like water, glucose, proteins, DNA.
Exactly. So when scientists were racing to sequence the human genome around the year 2000, they brought a very logical bottom-up assumption to the table.
Which was what?
Well, they looked at human complexity, our intricate organs, our abstract thought, our behavior, and they assumed our chemical inventory would have to reflect that complexity.
Oh, I see. They figured we must have a massive genetic parts list.
Right. They estimated humans must have somewhere around 100,000 genes.
Wow, okay.
But when the draft sequence was finally completed, the actual number came in around 20,000 protein-coding genes.
Wait, just 20,000?
Yep. And to put that in perspective, that tiny C. elegans roundworm we mentioned, it has about 19,000 genes.
Wait, I need to make sure I'm hearing this right. A microscopic worm has 19,000 genes, and a human has 20,000.
Yeah.
We're basically tying a tiny worm in genetic complexity.
It actually gets more humbling than that. Some plants, like rice, actually have significantly more genes than we do.
No way. Rice.
Yes, rice. So the takeaway here is this massive shift in how we understand biology. Human complexity isn't explained by having a larger inventory of chemical parts.
It's about what you do with the parts.
Exactly. It is explained by how those parts interact and organize. As you move up the hierarchy, complexity is generated by things like alternative splicing.
Okay, let's break that down. Because alternative splicing sounds like something, I don't know, an electrician does. What does that actually look like inside us?
Sure, so think of your genes like a dictionary of words. A simple organism might only be able to read those words sequentially to make very basic, simple sentences.
Right.
But human cells can take those exact same words, cut them up, and splice them together in thousands of different combinations to write complex poetry and instruction manuals and epic novels.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, one single gene can produce multiple different proteins depending on how the cell edits the instructions. Add in complex regulatory networks where genes act as switches, turning other genes on and off, and you realize it isn't about having more ingredients. It's about having an incredibly sophisticated recipe.
So we can't just look at the raw materials. We have to look at the connections, which makes me wonder how those chemicals actually cross the threshold to become something living, because molecules themselves aren't alive.
They aren't. Life itself is an emergent property. And that appears when we step up to the second rung of the ladder, which is the cellular level.
Where cells are the basic structural and functional units of an organism.
Right. And to see emergence in action here, just think about your heart. If you isolate a single cardiac muscle cell, a cardiomyocyte, and place it alone in a petri dish with the right nutrients, it has a very specific behavior.
What does it do?
Well, driven by its chemical makeup and the flow of ions, that lone cell will actually twitch. It beats on its own completely random rhythm.
Just a solitary little cell flexing away in a dish.
Exactly. But a twitching cell is not a heartbeat. It can't pump blood.
Right, it's just moving.
To get a heartbeat, you need to connect thousands of these cardiomyocytes together to form a tissue. They link up using these physical structures called intercalated discs.
Okay.
And inside these discs are tiny tunnels called gap junctions. These tunnels are so small that they allow electrical signals ions to pass instantly from one cell's interior directly into the next.
So they're physically hardwired together.
Yes. When you wire thousands of cells together this way, they stop their individual random twitching. The electrical signal washes over all of them simultaneously, and they synchronize into one massive coordinated contraction wave.
And that's the heartbeat.
That is the heartbeat. It's a tissue-level emergent property. It simply does not exist in a single cell.
Okay, so a single cell twitches, but a connected network of them actually beats. If cells grouping together into these specialized networks is what creates these functions, how did anyone figure this out before modern technology?
That is a great question.
I mean, how do you map out tissues if you don't even have the microscopes to see the cells connecting?
It took a really radical shift in perspective. There was this French anatomist named Marie-Françoise Xavier Bichat back in the year 1800.
1800, so way before cell theory.
Decades before cell theory was officially established. And Bichat actually distrusted microscopes. He felt the crude lenses of the time distorted reality, so he refused to use them.
Wait, he mapped out tissues without a microscope?
He relied entirely on his unaided senses and just incredibly rigorous dissection. He managed to identify 21 distinct tissues in the human body.
21, just by looking at them.
By observing their texture, their elasticity, and critically how they reacted to chemicals and how they decayed.
That is wild. He categorized microscopic building blocks without ever seeing the microscopic parts.
He did. And by doing this, he triggered a massive paradigm shift in medicine. Before Bichat, anatomical giants like Galen looked at organs as unified, uniform blocks.
Like if your heart was sick, the whole heart was just deemed sick.
Exactly. But Bichat countered this. He proved that disease doesn't attack a whole organ uniformly. It attacks specific tissues within it.
Hold on, I need to stop you there for a second.
Yeah.
Because I hear people use the words tissue and organ interchangeably all the time.
Oh, constantly. Yeah.
Like someone will say, I have deep tissue damage, and they just mean their shoulder hurts. Or they'll say a disease attacks your tissues, and it sounds like a generalized body part. Where is the actual strict boundary between a tissue and an organ?
In anatomy, the boundary is very strict. A tissue is a group of similar cells, along with the stuff they secrete, working together for one common specialized function.
And we have 4 primary types, right?
Right. Epithelial, connective, muscle, and nervous tissue. An organ, however, is a structure built from 2 or more different tissue types cooperating to perform a much more complex function.
So an organ is essentially a coalition of tissues.
That's a perfect way to put it. Take the stomach. It isn't just one type of tissue.
What's it made of?
Well, it relies on epithelial tissue lining the inside to secrete harsh digestive acids. But acid alone doesn't digest food, so it needs muscle tissue to physically churn everything around.
Makes sense.
Then it needs connective tissue to hold those layers together so the stomach doesn't literally tear itself apart. And it requires nervous tissue to coordinate those muscle contractions and send a signal to your brain telling you that you're full.
So because it combines multiple specialized tissues for a unified goal, it earns the title of organ. It's like a factory where all the specialized departments are finally operating under one roof. But the sources we read for this deep dive do point out that biology is inherently messy.
Oh, very messy.
We have these neat textbook definitions, but there are some real debates at the edges of this blueprint, aren't there?
Yeah, nature doesn't always care about our neat little categories. For instance, is the epidermis, the outer layer of your skin, is that a tissue or a miniature organ?
Because it has multiple things in it.
Right, contains multiple cell types, sweat glands, sensory structures. Most textbooks categorize it as an epithelial tissue, but a few treat the skin's full thickness as a bona fide organ because it houses several tissue types.
So it blurs the line.
It does. And there's also debate further down the ladder. Some researchers argue that the structures inside a cell, the organelles like mitochondria that generate power, are so highly organized they deserve their own tier.
Which would make it a 7-level model instead of 6. So we have these incredible complex organs factories doing specialized work. But a stomach-churning food doesn't do you any good if the nutrients have no way to travel around the body.
Right.
And a heart-pumping blood is useless if the blood isn't carrying oxygen from the lungs. So how do these individual factories actually coordinate with each other?
Well, that requires zooming out to the next rung on the ladder, which is the organ system level. This is multiple organs working together to maintain the stability of the entire body.
Which is homeostasis, right?
Yes, homeostasis. In the 19th and 20th centuries, physiologists Claude Bernard and Walter Cannon formulated this concept. It's the idea that all these organ systems, cardiovascular, respiratory, nervous, digestive, are constantly communicating to maintain a stable internal environment despite extreme changes outside.
What does that communication actually look like in real time? Say, I don't know, I suddenly start sprinting down the street.
Okay, so when you sprint, your muscle cells rapidly burn through oxygen and produce carbon dioxide. That is a chemical disruption. Your nervous system detects this chemical shift in your blood. It acts as a control center, instantly firing electrical signals to your respiratory system, forcing your lungs to breathe faster and deeper.
Oh, I see.
Simultaneously, it signals your cardiovascular system to increase your heart rate, pumping that fresh oxygen to the muscles faster. Multiple systems are instantly dynamically adjusting to maintain balance.
That is incredible.
And when all 11 organ systems in the human body function together in this symphony, you arrive at the top of the standard ladder, the organismal level, you.
But even the concept of you gets a bit complicated at this level, doesn't it? The sources point out that our definition of an organism might be a bit self-centered.
It really shatters the illusion of the solitary human.
How so?
Well, in 2013, researcher Eva Bianconi and her colleagues published a highly referenced estimate that the human body consists of approximately 37.2 trillion cells.
It is a lot of cells.
It is, but that number completely excludes the microbes.
The bacteria.
Right. There is a roughly equal, and in some estimates even greater, number of bacterial cells cohabitating with your human cells. You literally rely on them for digestion, for regulating your immune function, and for synthesizing essential vitamins.
So the organism at the top of the hierarchy is, strictly speaking, a composite.
Yes, it's trillions of your own cells, plus a massive ecosystem of microbial passengers.
That is wild. It makes me think about causation, actually, and who is really in control here.
How do you mean?
Well, if we use a corporate ladder analogy, in a traditional company, we assume the CEO, the organism, dictates what the interns at the bottom do.
Okay, sir.
But maybe it's more like a bottoms-up tech startup where the brilliant interns, the genes and chemicals, are actually writing the code that controls the whole show. Which way does causation actually flow in this hierarchy? Are we just helpless vehicles driven by our chemical genes?
You've just hit on one of the most profound debates in biology. Yeah. The idea that if you just fully understand the chemical level, you can perfectly predict everything above it is a philosophy called reductionism. It gave rise to the selfish gene concept popularized in the 1970s.
The idea that genes are just using our bodies to replicate themselves?
Right. But physiologist Dennis Noble has spent decades pushing back against this with a concept he calls biological relativity.
Meaning the genes aren't dictators?
Exactly. Noble points out that there is no privileged level of causation. Causation flows upward. Yes, chemicals build cells, cells build tissues. But causation also flows downward.
Downward causation.
The activity of the whole organism can actually constrain and modify the behavior of the chemicals at the very bottom.
Wait, how does that physically happen? How does a macroscopic experience at the organism level reach down and change a chemical?
Okay, think about chronic stress. Say you, the whole organism, are stuck in terrible traffic every single day, feeling intensely stressed.
Which happens a lot.
Right. Your brain perceives this threat and signals your adrenal glands to dump a hormone called cortisol into your bloodstream.
Okay, so cortisol is flooding the system.
That cortisol travels throughout your body, physically crosses the membranes of your cells, enters the nucleus and binds to specific receptors on your DNA.
It touches the DNA.
By binding there, it physically turns the transcription of certain genes on or off, altering your immune response and your metabolism.
Oh, wow.
So a macroscopic experience in traffic translated into a physical molecule that altered a genetic recipe. The hierarchy is fundamentally a two-way street.
Our environments and our macro choices literally reach into our molecular pantry and change how the recipe is cooked.
Exactly.
And understanding this two-way street isn't just an academic exercise, because for doctors and patients, this map of the structural organization is literally a matter of life and death.
It is the foundation of modern medicine. When a physician looks at a disease, they are essentially trying to track an error as it cascades up or down this structural ladder.
The sources use sickle cell disease to illustrate this, and it is a fascinating example of a vertical chain reaction.
It really is.
Because it starts at the absolute base, right?
Sure.
The chemical level. There is a single DNA-based substitution. One chemical letter is out of place in the genetic code, which swaps out just one amino acid in the entire hemoglobin protein chain.
One single amino acid swapped. Under normal, highly oxygenated conditions, you might not even notice, but under low oxygen conditions, that chemically altered hemoglobin protein misbehaves.
What does it do?
Well, at the cellular level, the protein polymerizes.
Which means what, physically?
Instead of floating freely, the mutant hemoglobin proteins snap together like a stack of magnetic beads. They form these long, rigid rods inside the red blood cell.
Oh, so instead of the cell being a flexible, squishy disc that can slide easily through tiny blood vessels.
The rigid rods stretch the cell out into a sharp, rigid sickle shape.
And blood is actually a connective tissue. So if your cells are suddenly rigid and pointy, instead squishy, they aren't going to flow smoothly. They're going to catch on each other. You hit the tissue level with a microscopic traffic jam.
Exactly. The sickled cells clump together inside the small blood vessels, blocking the flow of blood, which takes us directly to the organ level.
Because the organs aren't getting blood.
Because those capillaries are blocked, they can't deliver oxygen. This starves the local tissues and leads to organ infarction, actual tissue death within organs. It commonly damages the spleen, the bones, and the lungs.
Which means failing organs cascade all the way up to the organismal level. The patient experiences severe whole-body pain crises, chronic anemia, and systemic damage.
All from one chemical typo.
One chemical typo ripples through all 6 levels. The source material also points out cystic fibrosis does something very similar, right?
Yeah, a tiny DNA deletion at the chemical level ruins a chloride channel at the cellular level.
Which makes mucus incredibly thick at the tissue level.
Exactly, which clogs the lungs and pancreas at the organ level, leading to chronic infections for the whole organism.
The logic of the hierarchy illuminates the pathology of the disease perfectly.
It does.
But this also highlights the danger of the one gene, one disease misconception. Because for sickle cell, it maps out in a very clean, straight line.
Right, it's very direct.
But for complex traits like human height, psychiatric conditions, or heart disease, they don't map cleanly to just one gene.
No, they don't.
If you try to skip levels in your reasoning, if you just look at the chemical DNA and ignore the cellular interactions, or you ignore the downward causation from the organism's lifestyle, you are missing the actual mechanics of what is happening.
Skipping levels leads to bad science and bad medicine. Complex traits are the ultimate result of biological relativity.
Because it's all interacting.
Right. They involve interactions across many genes, modulated by the tissue environment, and heavily influenced by downward causation. You cannot understand depression or obesity by exclusively looking at the chemical level. You have to respect the entire ladder.
And respecting that ladder is how precision medicine works today. We've developed this massive medical toolkit, and every tool is designed to intervene at a very specific rung of the hierarchy.
Yeah, if we look at cutting-edge treatments, they map perfectly onto this blueprint. When scientists use CRISPR to edit DNA, they are intervening strictly at the chemical level.
But if a patient receives CAR therapy for cancer, where doctors extract the patient's T cells, re-engineer them to hunt tumors, and put them back, that is a cellular-level intervention.
Exactly. And if someone suffers severe burns and receives a skin graft, or researchers grow an engineered patch of cartilage in a lab, they are operating at the tissue level.
And organ transplants replacing a failing kidney or heart are definitionally intervening at the organ level.
Right. When a patient needs a pacemaker to regulate a heartbeat, or dialysis to mechanically clean their blood, we are providing mechanical support for an entire failing organ system.
Which leaves the very top, the organismal level.
The organismal level is where public health and lifestyle medicine live. When a doctor prescribes a change in diet, better sleep routines, or a stress reduction regimen, they are treating the organism as a whole.
And thanks to downward causation, those macroscopic organismal changes ripple back down through the systems.
Exactly. They alter the tissue environment, they change cellular metabolism, and they physically influence chemical gene expression. Recognizing which level a disease originates at and choosing the right level to target the treatment is the core of effective medicine.
When you take a step back and view this entire blueprint at once, the sheer scale of it is just awe-inspiring. You, listening to this right now, are not just a sack of trillions of cells sloshing around in water.
No, definitely not.
You are a towering, meticulously architected achievement of organization. Your ability to breathe, to understand the words we are saying, to feel your own pulse, none of those abilities exist in the raw carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen that make up your body.
It's incredible.
Your consciousness, your complexity, your very life is born entirely from the relationships between your parts. It is emergence in its purest form.
And if we step back even further, it leaves us with something quite profound to ponder.
What's that?
Well, we've traced this ladder from invisible atoms up to the human organism. But anatomy actually borrowed this hierarchical framework from broader biology. And in biology, the ladder doesn't stop with the individual organism, it keeps going.
Wait, it extends past us?
It extends to the population level, to the community level, to massive ecosystems, and ultimately to the biosphere of the entire planet.
Wow.
So if the central rule of this blueprint holds true, if every single rung of the ladder creates magical emergent properties that the lower parts didn't have on their own, it raises an incredible question.
Which is?
What are the emergent properties of humanity as a whole? When billions of human organisms interact, organize, and share information across the globe, what new, higher-level properties emerge in our global network that no single human possesses on their own?
That is a wild thought to sit with. From a single genetic ingredient to the architecture of your cells to the networks connecting all of us, it is the relationships that make the magic. Keep exploring, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.